Welcome back to another episode of Growth Marketers Podcast. I'm Samuel Timothy.
And I'm Taylor Rowe. Today's episode is another edition of our Q&A. We get tons of questions from our clients, from prospects, from listeners to the podcast. And so every couple of episodes, we love to dive into those questions and do our best to address them and give you the answer either that you're looking for or maybe that you're not looking for. So hopefully you enjoy the episode.
All right, Taylor, today we're actually doing one of those episodes where we go back and look at some of the feedback we've gotten from our listeners. We have listeners that are sending in questions or making comments that are probably a question that we did not address on a particular episode. And we also get, some of these questions from our clients as well. So we're going to use this time to try to answer about 5 of those questions we saw were somewhat common.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're listening to this episode and you have some questions that you want to submit or something you're struggling with or trying to understand or even get some backup, right? When you're talking to your CEO or your marketing director and you want us to kind of get, put our opinion in there, please send those in. We love to get these questions. We love to do these episodes where we address questions from the listeners. So the first question we have, Sam, I'll let you answer this first, is do keywords still matter in SEO? And this is something that people ask all the time, or sometimes even, if I'm meeting with a client or prospect, not so much of a question as a statement of, keywords don't matter so much anymore. Keywords aren't important anymore. So what are your thoughts on that? Do keywords still matter when it comes to your website and to search engines?
Well, I don't know if the conversational language is ever going to go away. Unless we stop communicating in words, I don't think keywords are ever going to go away, right? That's my thought, because I think the deeper question that they have is they're just thinking as machine learning is getting better, natural language processing is getting better, search engines are making sense of what the context of what's on a website or on a page. And that means that they don't necessarily need to incorporate keywords into the context of a website. And so that's where I think the logic is. But at the end of the day, people are still querying things to Google, and you need to have answers to those queries in the context of your website, which ultimately will require incorporating keywords. So it is no longer about stuffing words to kind of trick the system, but it's about really answering the questions of the prospective customers and customers that are asking those questions to Google.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think it's a no-brainer that keywords are absolutely important, but it's not the same as that it used to be, right? And as you mentioned, keyword stuffing, the days of if we want to rank for whatever, grain-free dog food, and you just put that keyword in the title tag and in the meta description and write 200 words and you rank automatically because you're the only one out there writing about that and that has that keyword in there, those days are gone, right? There's so much more content out there. And Google is getting so much smarter, as you mentioned, with machine learning and understanding not just what the content is about, but the context of that content and the intent of the user, along with all the other data around how similar searches have the content that they found and the content that Google has put at the top of the rankings and how they interact with those websites. There's so much data and everything is happening so fast that simply adding a keyword to your page or adding the keyword within the context of the blog article or the title tag, that alone is not going to get you to rank, right? But that means it doesn't mean that you can ignore that, right? It means actually that you have to focus even more on the quality of your content, the depth of the content, making sure that we address all of the different questions that our audience may be asking. We may not have to be as direct. Google can interpret things a little bit more. So we don't have to put every variation of a keyword. Back in the day, people used to put like misspellings of a keyword, right? Because people might misspell it. Like Google's caught up and is smarter than that now. So keywords aren't the same as it used to be, but keywords are absolutely important. And like I said, there's even more data now around how people are searching and what people are searching to support that.
Yeah, and I think one thing for us marketers to need to start thinking about is we're becoming more and more of a publication than just a business operating to just serve whatever product or service that we have. So I think content is becoming even more an integral part of the overarching marketing strategy, that don't get hung up on the keywords, just get really focused on helping the customer and then answering their question.
Addressing the question. Yeah. And that's really, maybe that's the takeaway is the keyword is always important because as you mentioned, the keyword is how we're searching, right? Now, what's more important is how you address that search, that keyword. Mm-hmm. So it's less about putting that keyword on your website. Like, yes, you need that, but you need to do the research around what people are searching and then create content that addresses those keywords.
Yeah. I think it's always just putting the buyer in mind as you thinking about, and also it's just how would the buyer describe the product or the service or the pain? Because I think we get hung up on our jargons, internal corporate jargons or our industry jargons, and sometimes our customer may not know how to phrase that.
Yep.
So addressing those questions and not always trying to think that, oh, our customers are going to describe our product this way because we branded it this way, or we have a trademark for our product, because sometimes not all the customers know about that. So keeping that in mind as well as you create content.
All right. Well, a second question that we have here is something, again, that we get all the time, but specifically the question was, what metrics should I measure? I'd love to hear your answer on this, but maybe to clarify what the person might have been asking, I guess what metrics you measure or what metrics do you optimize for? How do we track progress? It's a bit of a vague or broad question, but I think there's a lot of good topics we can cover here. So Sam, what would you say if someone says, what metrics should I measure with my marketing campaigns?
I think, like you said, I think the clarification is in there in terms of what they were actually trying to measure. But if I were to really give an answer, my thought would be this one, because it really comes down to the tactic and also just the overall strategy that's being employed. What I mean by that is you have leading indicators and lag measures. So if I'm really just looking at as a top level, as an organization, executive member, all I really care about is my sales numbers going up. And if so, there are some leading indicators that lead to that, right? So if I'm from a sales side, I might be looking at, hey, do we have enough deals in our pipeline? Do we have enough, conversations that are happening with my sales team? Do we have enough leads coming in? All of those are metrics that I would care about on the sales side. And I think on the marketing side, there's also the lag measures and lead measures, right? So the lag measures would be like, hey, are there enough opportunities being created by marketing team's efforts? Are there enough sales qualified demos or inbound leads coming in from the sales effort? But there's also a lot of leading indicators that will be more like, if you're doing the specific tactics, let's say if it's an SEO strategy, are my keywords ranking? Is my organic traffic increasing? Is my engagement on my website is better? And then if it's more so just more of an awareness sort of tactics, will be, do I have enough engagement on my social post, or there's enough attendees on my webinar? So all of those really do dictate what the metric that you would look at. That would be my answer. What were you thinking, Taylor?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think maybe if we could sum it up, it's like, measure everything. Like, I think you really should measure everything. Mm-hmm. But what you should optimize for is that what you refer to as a lag measure, which ultimately is revenue, right? Mm-hmm. So the closer to revenue, depending on your business model, the closer to revenue that you can actually measure, that's what you should optimize for. So what that means is when we talk to companies and we're doing all, they could be coming to us and they say, we're doing social ads, we're doing Google ads, we're doing posting organically, we have a podcast, we're doing email campaigns, we're writing content for SEO. And you can ask them like, well, what's working really well for you? They might say paid search, or they might say, Facebook ads, or they might say organic, right? And if you say, well, why is that working the best for you? And if the answer is essentially leads, like the cost per lead or the number of leads, without having any data to support that, how many of those leads are turning into actual paying customers, right? Or what do we count as a lead? You mentioned qualified demos or, qualified opportunities. Like, then that makes more sense to me, because that's so much closer to that end result, which is revenue, right? As marketers, we want to optimize for revenue, but at the same time, we can't control that entire sales process. So if we can have a consensus with the sales team to say these 10 leads, we had a legitimate shot of closing, right? These are really qualified opportunities. We're in the negotiation stage. Whether we close those deals or not, that's what we should optimize for. So the channels that are influencing and sourcing those leads is what we should optimize for. Certainly we want to track everything else, right? We want to track keyword rankings. We want to track the cost per click, and we want to track those cost per leads and those sorts of things. But I don't want to make decisions for the future of my marketing simply based on those micro KPIs, or as you referred to them, the leading indicators, right? Mm-hmm. Because that doesn't tell me the whole story. And almost always, if you are taking a comprehensive approach and you're investing into all those channels that I just mentioned, the number one and number two campaigns are always going to be like, or sources rather, for lead quality is going to be like organic search and probably a branded paid search campaign, right? Because all these other touch points are happening out there. And by the time your buyer's ready to talk to a salesperson, maybe they've interacted with all of your other awareness campaigns earlier on, and now they're just typing in your brand name, going to the website and converting. And then we say, hey, only thing that's working right now is paid search, right? So you have to have the full picture. You have to look at some micro KPIs in the context of what that campaign is. But we should optimize ultimately for that end result as a collective effort of everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a good analogy. Something just came to mind. I think if you think back to the time, when people were actually doing physical networking events, You go to a lot of events, you see one person for the first time. Well, you might just share it, shake hands, say the name, walk away. But then you see the same person 3, 4, 5, 6 times on all the other networking events in the area. You start to recognize them. You take their number one day. You actually have meetings with them. Maybe not necessarily meetings. Sorry, you'll take their number. Then now you are able to greet them by first name, and you actually know what they do and where they work. And then maybe like 7 meetings later, then they're like, oh, hey Taylor, I was thinking about you, and can we set up a time to sit down? I think I want to learn a little more about how you guys can help me. So if you look at it, it's like all those initial activities may not mean much, but those activities and interactions are what made the trust to build. So in that same way, I think, in the digital sphere, people are actually coming to your website, looking at it. They might be listening to your blog, watching your, video, or reading your blog, or maybe on your newsletter, seeing things. But one day they're going to wake up and come to you directly and say, hey, I want to have a conversation. And then you're going to say, oh, everybody that comes to our website just came directly because they knew our brand. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but that's something just came to my mind. I think you need to be doing everything. And sometimes, some of those activities may not result into an immediate sale, but maybe it's 6 months, 7 months later that you actually see that somebody actually took an action from multiple interactions they had with your brand.
Absolutely. I know you had some questions on your end.
Yeah, I had a couple here. One of them is basically says, we don't have a big budget. We're a small sales and marketing team. What can we do in the short term to build a strong pipeline?
Yeah, this is a tough one and something we do all the time in terms of companies, not saying like, hey, we don't have a big budget. Where do we invest? Like, what can we do? What's the most bang for our buck, right? I guess the first clarifying question would just be like, what does that mean to you in terms of, we don't have a big budget, right? Does that mean right now we can only spend $10,000 a month on, ads or on an agency or on marketing? Or does that mean we can spend $500 a month, right? Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, there's some threshold there depending on your industry where probably maybe nothing, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's better to save your money. If you legitimately can't invest any money, you're not going to have enough volume to do what you're trying to do. I mean, at the end of the day, there's some law of averages when it comes to your addressable market that you're trying to get in front of. So if you don't have a huge marketing budget, then you have to start small. And starting small is probably in direct contrast to the second half of the question, which was, how do I build pipeline, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's tons of things you can do that only cost your time, right? If you don't have any budget, you can create content. You can post on LinkedIn. Maybe you can create, low budget videos internally. You can write blog posts. So there's tons of things that you can do, all pretty much organic channels, which inherently are not going to build pipeline in the short term. I mean, maybe combine something with a sales strategy of creating original content, webinars, podcasts, those sorts of things, and have some sort of an outreach strategy to get your key target accounts to show up to those and do more of a one-to-many sale. But again, it's when you talk about, hey, short-term building pipeline, no budget. And this happens, we've had this conversation many times with companies of like, hey, we really need to just get 3 new clients, next month or next quarter. Like that's our goal and nothing beyond that. To me, that's a sales strategy. Like pick up the phone and start calling people. Like if you only can handle two clients and that's the goal. Like to me, that's not a marketing approach. And unfortunately, I would say, yeah, you need a decent budget that's sustainable for you to be able to test and iterate and scale things. So maybe a bit of a flawed question, or maybe not what every listener wants to hear. But realistically, I mean, it would be like, saying, I think I actually heard the other day of Grant Cardone or one of those real estate guys, social media was like, what can I do? I have a $5,000 I can invest in real estate. And his answer was like, nothing. Wait until it's $50,000. I mean, some things it's just not going to be worth your time.
Yeah. I mean, if I can just be very frank, as somebody who's looking short term and want to build a pipeline and don't have a budget, I think there's a leadership overall perspective on what
again, it's the wrong question, right?
Is what I see in here, because I think if the leadership doesn't see, investing into the business to grow and to build pipeline, that's not a short-term vision. I think that's just trying to survive problem, right? And you need to have a serious soul searching happening internally within that organization. Say, hey, we've played a lot of short-term games, but that's not how we're going to win. Right. If we want to play, the long game and really win at this, then we have to have a long-term investment into this. I think that's my perspective. I think a lot of times this is actually a leadership conversation more than like, let me just fix the short-term pipeline because I got to meet the quota for the month or whatever that is. So that's my thought about this. I think as business leaders need to start thinking about marketing as an investment, not as a cost center. and that why it's important to invest into building a strong brand, which leads to quality conversations that ultimately increases the type of deals that, the pipeline that you would have or the opportunities that you have, which would help your salespeople do a better job in closing deals. And you would ultimately see your sales cycle getting shorter and shorter and your deals getting bigger. And you will be much happier as an organization and much more stable. And I think that seems counterintuitive. And sometimes the hard answer is that. I don't know. I mean, I think
Yeah.
I don't know how
Apologies to whoever asked this question if it wasn't the answer you're looking for. But I agree that the way the question is phrased, and you're not alone. I mean, this is something we get all the time, but it's indicative of, like you said, I think a leadership that believes that they know they need to or thinks that they need to invest into digital marketing because they see and they've heard buzzwords and they see other competitors doing it, but they don't truly understand why. And if you don't truly understand why and the process behind it, then you're going to say, well, let's just dip our toes in the water, right? Let's just see what we can do, get some quick wins, and then go all out. And it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, it's like maybe try to go to gym once a week and see if I get six pack, and then I'll really, really put some time in.
Once I get 3 abs, then I'll have to go for the other 3.
Exactly. I think this question that I have is almost probably the same, but slightly different. It's just, what channel is best for a company that's just getting started?
So yeah, I would say it's similar to what we said with the other question. And I don't think, and maybe again, if we were too harsh on the last question, it's because of the idea of what can we do in the short term to build pipeline, right? There's a lot of things, again, you can do with a small budget if you're just getting started. If it were me and I'm just getting started and I didn't have a ton of buy-in from leadership, or maybe I didn't have a huge budget, again, as long as you're not expecting immediate results, which shouldn't be, especially if we're talking about things just getting started, I would just focus on creating content. I would create as much content. I would sit with my salespeople and listen to the conversations they're having with their potential customers. I would interview existing customers, ask them essentially questions to better understand the buyer's journey. And I would start creating content for every potential scenario within that buyer's journey in whatever format that I feel like was best, right? And then put that content on your website and blog posts, create videos, create infographics, create conversations on LinkedIn, post, all the time on LinkedIn. Again, there's no real hard capital expenditure here. It's just time. And it goes back to, again, that leadership question. Maybe if you're the only marketer in your department, right? Or you don't have a huge budget and your leadership is questioning, why you're spending half of your day creating content that no one's reading, then again, there's probably a leadership question. But there's tons of things you can do when just getting started. And that's always the foundation for any solid company that's winning marketing, is that they've created a ton of content that addresses their audience and helps them in their buyer's journey, right? You're not trying to force anyone into a funnel. You're not saying, let's run a lead ad on Facebook and send them to a landing page and get them to convert and have a drip campaign and SDR is going to call them. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about really turning your company into the Wikipedia for your industry, right? Essentially become a resource for your customer and help your customer.
Yeah. And I think I agree 100% with what you said. I think especially if you're just trying to pick one, I would narrow it down by a channel where I believe my prospective customers are hanging out the most. And so I think trying to win organically on SEO might be a very long game. Trying to win the YouTube game might be a little bit harder because of, maybe your audience isn't that active there. But if you are, especially in the B2B space, maybe just honing in on LinkedIn and being very active there, that'll be my recommendation. But yeah, organic content, just go all in on it.
All right. And our last question for today, actually is a similar theme, I guess, when we were picking out these questions, we sympathized with this kind of theme here, but it is, again, something that we see a lot of times with the types of companies we work with. So question is, what should my first hire be in my marketing department? So Sam, what would you say, let's just say you're a mid-sized company in the B2B space and you're trying to build a marketing department. Who do you hire first and how do you hire them?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to make that first hire, you need a thinker and a doer in one. What I mean by that is there's a lot of marketers that are just strategists, but they don't really have the execution skills. But there's a lot of people that are doers, but they don't have the big picture thinking capabilities. And so if you're going to be making that sort of a first hire, you need to have a combo person who's got the ability to think in big terms and big pictures and be able to have a big picture strategy and then be able to get into the weeds and actually execute some of those things. So that would be what I would look for in a person. But to expect one person to do a whole lot of things is an unrealistic expectation. So just be cautious of that. Yep. One person cannot be the paid specialist, the SEO specialist, the marketing automation specialist, the content specialist, the big strategist, the data analyst, and then also go design something thing and implement that on the website. And if you have that person, the one person that can do all of those things, that's a unicorn. And you might be sacrificing other areas because that one person is trying to do too many things.
Yeah, when companies are at this point, a lot of times their question is, do I build a marketing team internally or do I outsource to an agency? And I think that's the wrong question. I think you need both. And I think you just have to think logically around where is it more likely to have a specialist, right? And what I mean by that is, let's say we're talking about our product, right? Because our product or our service, like where is the expert going to sit, right? Is the expert in our product and our service and our customer and understanding the buyer's journey? Is that expert going to sit at a marketing agency or is he going to sit internally, right? He or she, right? And then same thing on, let's say, paid search, paid social, SEO, web development. Are we going to have a web development specialist? Does that make more sense for them to sit internally or at an agency? And that's the question that I would look at. So when you're building a marketing team, I would look at someone who has the capability to fully understand our business model, become an expert, become a subject matter expert, and has the ability to communicate that online, right? Content writing, again, videos, podcasts, webinars, whatever that would be. That's the expert I need internally. And then what I need to build around that person is resources to promote that content. So someone who really understands how to promote that on paid and how to reach my audience via paid. Someone who really understands, marketing technologies and marketing automation. Someone who really understands search engines and the ins and outs of that, right? Someone who understands search engines is not necessarily someone who's going to write that content for you. It's going to be the one that helps your content be found. So those specialty pieces, I think that's where it makes sense to outsource. But the expert in marketing can sit outside. The expert in your field needs to sit inside. So the first hire I would hire is somebody who has that capability to create content and really understand your business.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think as we are seeing more and more, marketing is becoming more complex with a lot of technology and analytics and all of those things, that pretty soon you're going to need a bigger team than just a one-man show. But in the meantime, you need those critical roles internal to the organization and leverage expertise from outside where needed.
Yeah. And I would continue on that path as I'm hiring more. Again, continue. Where does it make sense for that? What do we need? What do we need an expert for the next stage of our marketing growth? Where do we need those experts? And for a while, it's going to be, again, creating more content. Eventually, you may look at it and say, we're creating so many videos right now, if that's part of your strategy, that it makes sense for us to hire a video person inside. So we're going to move that expert from outside to inside, right? And you're going to continue to do that with different channels, technologies, all these things that you're doing. But that's really the question I would continue to ask. Where does it make sense to have that expert sit?
Sounds good. Those were some really good questions. People are,
absolutely
thinking of.
Keep submitting those questions. If you enjoyed the podcast, please give us a like, subscribe wherever you're listening, share this podcast with a friend or a colleague. We always enjoy that. And hopefully, if this is your first time listening, hopefully you enjoyed and come back next week.
Growth Marketers is brought to you by One IMS, helping you reach new heights through integrated marketing. One world, one web, one IMS.